You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's story doesn't come from a tourist or a thrill seeker. It comes from Rich, a licensed therapist, a hunter, and a man deeply rooted in Yurok culture, who grew up believing Bigfoot wasn't a mystery; it was a part of life. But one night, while fishing on his family's stretch of the Klamath River, that belief turned into something else. The fog was thick, the river full of salmon, and then the call came. Deep, guttural, and primal. Rich froze, rifle in hand, heart pounding. This isn't just a tale from the woods. It's a story that crosses generations, culture, and something far more ancient. This is a story of Rich and what he heard on the river that night, so stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Rich today. Rich is an individual that was connected to me from Eric from the China Flat Museum in Willow Creek. Good friend over there, always sending some interesting stuff my way. So make sure if you're in the Willow Creek area, you head over to the China Flat Museum. They have some great Bigfoot artifacts on display. But Rich, it is a privilege to finally talk to you. It sounds like you've got a lot of interesting things that have happened over the years. You are from Yurok heritage, and I'm just excited to talk to you today. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to it. It's been a fun and interesting journey to kind of be involved in this and just kind of share some of those experiences that I've had, and then how it's kind of connected to my culture, my Yurok culture, and, you know, some of the stories and the things that, I've heard over the years from elders and different family members. So it's always been something that's, kind of been near and dear, close to my heart type thing. And without getting too long-winded, I'm sure you have some questions, but one of the things that is kind of interesting for me is I was a school counselor, and I'm also a licensed clinical therapist. And, being born and raised in Northern California, this was just part of our folklore. It was part of our culture. As a Yurok person, that was just some of the story I always heard from my family, from my great-grandmother, who was a full-blooded Yurok person. And she spoke our language, and, she passed a lot of those traditions and those things on. And the wild people is what she referred to them as. And so that was something that kind of was just part of my existence from day one. So anyway, with that being said, that's a little bit about me. And if you have any questions, we can kind of delve deeper into this or whatever you choose. So I'm here at your disposal.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And thank you so much for being here today. It must be incredible to grow up in a culture where it was a part of your life from your earliest memories, I would imagine.
It was, and that was the real interesting thing. Again, kind of going back to that whole being a counselor thing. I was at the school. I was a school counselor for special education and worked with kids and families. And I was speaking with a principal one day, and she was from Southern California, and she was, we got along great. We were communicating about some of the stuff that was happening in the school. And she says, Rich, it's just like people that believe in Bigfoot. It's just so odd to me that, there's actually people out there that believe in Bigfoot. I kind of looked at her and kind of big-eyed, I'm sure, and mouth kind of hanging open. I was like, well, what do you mean? Thinking to myself, you don't believe in Bigfoot. And anyway, I kind of brushed it off and kind of chuckled. And I told her, I said, well, God, I never thought that there wasn't a Bigfoot. And then I started kind of thinking to myself, geez, I guess maybe not everybody is a Bigfoot believer, like I am. And I think I was 32 at that time.
Was there a time in your life where things got extremely real for you? It went from knowing this growing up, but then now it's right in front of you.
We traditional gill net fish for salmon on the Klamath River. And so one summer evening, myself and a buddy were out fishing. As we do up and down the river, we have traditional fishing holes where different families have traditional ownership of the hole. So that's just something you've done, with your family for thousands of years. You have a traditional fishing hole where your family fishes. So we were down there fishing with our nets, and we had a great catch, and we were cleaned up our fish and pulled our nets out, and we were sitting on the bank. It was about probably 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And we were sitting in the truck, and I remember it plain as day because of the circumstances surrounding it. So it just cemented it, for me. And I was sitting there in my truck, and the doors were open. It was mid-September, maybe late September. That's when the big salmon run comes in. So you gotta visualize this. The rivers are just full of salmon, and the bears are down on the river bar, pulling salmon out. There's a lot of activity this time of year. And so we're sitting there, and it's super foggy. I'm sitting on my family's river bar. We have like 100 and some acres. It's been in the family forever. And just, feeling good. We just did good on fishing and relaxing. The doors are open. And then it was kind of like an eerie silence and quiet. And all of a sudden, across the river, I hear this, this huge, the sound that sounded like it was coming from something that was big. And I was explaining this to my son last night. He was asking me about it. And I said, it was just, I can't even put it into words. I do the best I can when somebody asks me about it. But it sounded really deep and guttural and big. And it did it again. It went, woo, woo, like 2 more times. And the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got goosebumps all over my body, and I was just scared. And it was this really primal feeling of, what was that? I've been on the river my whole life, fishing, hunting, and a lot of that stuff was at night. On the reservation, we're allowed to do that. So, you see and hear everything. You hear coyotes and, mountain lion once in a while if you're lucky, elk, bugling sometimes. You hear everything. So you have like something you can connect it with, but like, oh, it's this or it's that. And there was nothing that I had that I could connect that to. And immediately, I just kind of froze. And then I heard from up around the bend, probably 300 yards up, and the river kind of turns and goes right at the top of our property. And I heard something call back, ooh, ooh, sound just the same, just deep and just heavy bass. Like it had to have a huge chest cavity, now that I think later about it. And it was way up off the ground. It wasn't like down low, like, a lot of 4-legged critters are. And I just couldn't put a picture to what I was hearing, a face. And I looked over to the other person, and they were just like, what was that? And I looked over, and I had my rifle was sitting there. I had a 270 rifle, and, that'll shoot an elk or a bear or anything. And I looked down at my rifle, kind of reached for my rifle, and it did it again. Ooh, ooh, and then it stopped, and I just sat there kind of like paralyzed, just frozen. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to turn the lights on, just see if we can see anything. So I turned the lights on, and I was just kind of almost half-assed petrified. But I couldn't see anything because the fog was so dense, on the river, you couldn't see anything. Anyway, so that was that experience. And, we were both just kind of like, we just looked at each other like, okay, I don't know what that was, but it kind of sounded like, maybe some of the stuff we'd heard about from when we were kids. This was a Yurok person too. So, that was what happened. And it really it just grabbed me because of that, that primal feeling of something that was just much bigger than me and that could just tear me apart. It was very, very unsettling, very much so like nothing I'd ever heard before. And I didn't see anything. And, so I'm not saying that, I was a big hairy guy straight across the river, but there was nothing that I could put my finger on that seemed like what it was that I heard. And so I went and talked to this guy who was a teacher, and I think he did Bigfoot research. He would go out and investigate for them when they'd had stories. And he kind of walked me through the whole thing and tried to pin me down. And I was like, I can tell you that what I heard was nothing like I'd ever heard before. And he walked me through an elk, and I said, I've killed elk before. I've hunted elk, and this was no elk. It was nothing that I've ever heard before. And then sometime thereafter, I started kind of just researching a little bit, and I heard some vocalizations, and I was like, that's it. It was exact same thing that other people have said they heard, out there. And there was kind of like this excitement, but also kind of like, just, I don't even know how to explain it, it was panic that night a little bit, because of the feeling that I had, even though we had a rifle. And so yeah, that was kind of the gist of it. And then, like I said, I'd always heard stories from my Yurok grandmother and just different people, my uncle. And one of the stories was that they kind of lived with us or around us, and they smelled really bad. So we ran them off up into the caves. And there's stories about Blue Creek caves. And it's a real narrow area. It's a very, it's called I don't want to get too deep into it because it's traditional kind of cultural stuff, but it's a very sacred area. And it's kind of hard to find to get up in there. And, people know to be respectful up in this area, but that's where there's, allegedly some activity, or a lot of activity. And it's a spiritual place. So I've been up there when I was a kid. My mom and I would go up there, and part of our culture is Yuroks. We go to the high country and pray, and lots of stories connected to that. But anyway, that kind of catapulted me to be like, okay, I definitely had some kind of experience, and it seems much like the experience that other people have had, in the vocalizations were very much the same. And so I just feel like I'm a believer, and even though that was part of my mythology, and I just, it's incorporated in my growing up, after hearing that down at the river during that time of year when I think that, there was lots of fish, there's lots of food and resources available, it would kind of make sense that, that there would be something like that going on, fishing, hunting, whatnot. So it just kind of perpetuated some of my thoughts and ideas and beliefs about that were connected to my culture.
I'm trying to put myself in experiencing those sounds by the river. It just sounds incredible. Do you remember? Sometimes people will say, I heard the sound and it affected me physically in a certain way. Did this really hit you in a certain way, or affect you mentally at all? Or
yes, it absolutely physically. I'm a pretty big guy, and I was a wrestler, and I boxed, and I'm very comfortable, with just physicality, and it's just kind of been my existence my whole life. Played football, just very into contact sports, and this was something that, like I said, it made me feel small. And I'm 6'1", 300 pounds. I've been a weightlifter, bodybuilder. And that moment I felt just completely undressed. I mean, it was just like sitting in my truck, and, I had this like thing come over my body. Like I said, it was a primal fear of like, there's something out there that really hit me hard. And I wouldn't say I was shaking, but I was like, where's my gun? And even with my gun, sitting right there, a rifle, a high-powered rifle, I didn't really want to see it when I turned my lights on. I was like, it really got to the core of me. And, right now I'm kind of tensed up just talking about it, because I've never, I've come face to face with bears out in the woods, and usually you kind of yell and scream at a bear, make some noise, they'll turn around. I've hunted and taken down elk and bear and, everything, large animals that we have on the reservation, and, picked them up, packed them around, everything. And seen mountain lions, on the river, and they don't really scare me. This was really just something different, man. Yeah, it was something, like I said, that just made me feel small.
Do you think that first off, I want to make sure I'm referring to these in the right way during our. Is it okay to refer to them as Bigfoot? I want to make sure that I'm okay in doing that.
You know what? I so appreciate your respect with that, and whatever anybody wants to call it. I mean, there's lots of different tribes have different names, like Hupas, Umach, and my nanny, like I said, I don't know what the Yurok name was. There is a name for it, but they call him Ridge Runner. But yeah, Bigfoot. I mean, there's lots of different names that I've talked to with other tribal people. I've worked for different tribes, have a lot of Indian brothers and sisters, different reservations, and same stories, just different names. So yeah, whatever you want to call it. Man.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that, I've heard stories and accounts where there have been people in areas where Bigfoot have been, and they have been, affected by something that people will call infrasound. Do you think that there is actually anything to that, or is that a thing where, people that are experiencing that might just be amped up, or is there a history to that as well?
Can you explain what your definition is of that?
Sure.
'Cause maybe I understand
Sure.
different contexts.
It's kind of like you will get hit with a frequency where you'll not be able to move, or you'll feel nauseous or get a headache, and almost like they can control actions using this frequency that a large predator will also use, like lions can use them. Things like that.
You know what? That is interesting. I've never heard that before. Never thought about that, but I felt like I froze when I was sitting in that truck, and I was looking out right now, probably 150 yards away. And yeah, I mean, I felt like, now that you kind of put it in that context, I froze. I mean, that's kind of always been my recollection of that. And I think that's kind of why, even though I knew I had that gun there, I was in a truck. I could have turned the truck on, I could have whatever, but I just felt frozen. So I don't know if it was just from the fear alone, of like, what was that? And it was big, and something to boom across the river and still have that bass. It was yeah, I mean, kind of, like I said, kind of gives me a little knots in my stomach right now, because you go back to those feelings and experiences, and it was just so foreign. I could see where animals would kind of freeze. Just the fear is what I've always associated it with. So I don't know. I mean, but definitely fearful.
You had mentioned something in passing, and with questions, I'm going to be try to be extremely sensitive, because I know in this area there are areas where they are very, very sacred to your people. But you had mentioned that there have been things that happen in this area over the years. Is it even a thing where we might not even want to speak of these things that have happened, or is that a thing that you could perhaps share?
So I don't know that it's been necessarily malicious type stuff, or if I'm not sharing spots where people are going to run out there and set up camp and dig around. I don't think it's that would be showing disrespect or to my culture, my community, my family. I feel like there's so much activity, and like the Bluff Creek thing, that's technically within our Aboriginal territory. I think it is right on the cusp, moving into Karuk territory. And so there's been stories about Umach, Bigfoot, for years, the Ridge Runners in this area. And there was a guy that, I think it was Wallace, came out in 58, and he said, Bigfoot throwing this and that around, and then came back at the end, and when he was passing, and said it was a hoax. And those of us that are from those areas that are native, we just kind of laughed and scoffed it off, because we had these stories way before that dude came around. I mean, these are stories that we had from our grandparents, our great grandparents, our families, and in-depth stories. One thing I heard when I think it was like 1990s, I was in college, and one of my native professors said that when you go to some place, I'm not going to name it, that you might come across him or her, you know, kind of referencing him as Bigfoot. And either he can give you medicine, you know, good energy, good medicine for whatever it is that your prayers may be, or he can kill you. And I remember just kind of all of a sudden like thinking, wait a minute, what? You know, because to me, Bigfoot was always kind of this benign, you know, creature. I'd never heard any stories about tearing people apart or just people. It was just always like he just kind of lived out there with us, you know, and it's kind of part of our lore, part of our culture. But, you know, again, there's plenty of people who are like, oh, that's a bunch of garbage. But at the same time, most people that I talk to that are Yurok or other tribes, they're just like, no, you know, we have the same, you know, we believe in that. And just like the little people, you know, we believe in those guys. And when you're raised like that, it just becomes part of your ethos and how you perceive your reality and your world. And, you know, you want to move around respectfully and those types of things. But when this person said this to me, and I respected him a great deal, he was a professor and he was also native. And it just flattened me. I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean this thing could hurt me? And that was like the first time I really thought about it. And then it wasn't until like the last 5 or 10 years that I'd kind of been contemplating, like I heard some stories of like, you know, Teddy Roosevelt, because as I researched this, talked about these guys that came and told him a story. And these two hunters were somewhere out in Washington, and they were setting a trap line. This is like in whenever Teddy Roosevelt was president, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s. And they kept having contact with something, and then this alleged Bigfoot came into camp and killed one of the guys. And the other guy saw it and shot at it and ran off. And I mean, he came and told Teddy Roosevelt the story. There's much more to it than that. But the story he conveyed, he said he totally believed him. It was just compelling. And so, you know, then I started thinking, well, you know, maybe these things aren't always benign. Maybe there is a little bit of maliciousness, just like in human beings. You know, I mean, you can have a lot of good people, but there's wolves out there that are, you know, treacherous and dangerous. So I don't know, you know, you hear stories about people going missing in the woods. And so it just kind of brought a whole new perspective to me. Like whenever I go in the woods, I always pack, you know, I've always got a gun with me, usually a rifle, always a pistol. And I carry a high caliber pistol. I carry a 44 mag, and usually my, you know, just my 9mm or something. But, you know, if you run into a bear, 9mm, not going to be, I mean, you can take one down, but you need a higher capacity. But I have to say in the back of my head, I'm like, you know, if one of these things tries to take me out, I need to have a little bit of horsepower, you know, to protect myself. I spend a lot of time, you know, on the river fishing and hunting, and we have family property, you know, that I go around a lot. You know, just, I mean, I move around a lot up there. I've been pretty much in every fishing hole from my family's property, you know, down to the mouth of the river, like many of the guys that I move with that are family. And we like to get our feet on the ground and in the water and move around. And yeah.
There's a fair amount of people in, I'll just say the Bigfoot community, where they believe that Bigfoot are able to see or sense the intention of the person that is going out. Do you think there could be anything to that, or is that just something we may have made up?
You know, I mean, these are questions that you're presenting to me that are just so interesting. That would follow suit, I think, and I've never even thought about this before, with that my native professor guy who is very traditional, and a lot of the stories with him saying to me that if you're on this trail to go get your medicine, to go do your prayers, and that, you know, Bigfoot could kill you or give you good medicine, I would totally think that there could be a connection with that there, you know, there's a intuitive sense, like animals in general. You know, they say dogs can detect a good person or not so good person. You know, when I was told when I was a kid that if I was going to go hunting, you know, you want to pray, you want to, you know, smoke your, you know, put some smoke up to Creator and do some prayers, and just, you want to be in a good place. You have to be, no matter what it is, whether I'm fishing or eeling or hunting, You always want to be in a good place mentally. Your heart needs to be clean and pure in order for that animal to come to you. You know, whether it be kiwin, which is what we call eels, or pook, which is deer, or nepui, which is salmon. You always want to pray and be in a good place. And the older I get, the more I realize how important that is. So going back to intuition and just animals having the sixth sense, if you will, I mean, we hear about it often. I would absolutely think that they could pick up on vibes and know if somebody was there to harm them or, you know, whatever. I don't think as humans we're near as in tune as we used to be because we move so fast and, you know, congested society, you know, with cars and iPhones and everything. Whereas if you're living out on the land, your feet are touching the ground, you know, you're smelling the fresh air and you're just out there moving around, you're going to be a lot more in tune to your environment. So I don't know how in tune, but I just say, generally speaking, we know that there's empirical evidence and truth value with that kind of thought. So yeah, I mean, I could totally see that. And now that I hear that as an older person, I think he was kind of saying that they can tell, you know, I think from his words, if you're up there for good reasons or bad reasons. So maybe they'll kill you, or maybe they'll touch you and give you good medicine and you'll have this power. And that was a little too, like, I don't know, for me, maybe a little too woohoo at the time, but I listened to it, you know, and reflecting back on your question, that's really interesting. So I could definitely see connection with that.
Absolutely. In your culture, are there ever times when it's talked about that there is a form of communication that happens between people and Bigfoot, or even not being verbally out loud communication?
So I don't know anything about that. I just think that, yeah, I think that generally speaking, you know, we have a reverence for all living things, animals, everything in our environment, you know, the water, the trees, everything has energy, everything is alive. So just from our base of how we believe and think, generally speaking, you know, we respect everything. So, but as far as like having the ability to communicate, maybe telepathically, I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Do you know any of the history behind why they are called, did you say ridge runners?
So my limited understanding, because, you know, we don't have a exact science with this, just stories, is that they would move around on the ridges. That's where they traveled, you know, along the ridges. And, you know, that's where you would see and hear them. And maybe because it's up high, you can kind of see what's going on if you're going to hunt, or just staying up away from people and things. But yeah, they call them the ridge runners. And there's a Yurok name for it. I can't remember what it is right now, but there is a Yurok name for ridge runners.
It's extremely interesting. Eric had said that, to kind of lead into this, that you've actually had more than one encounter with Bigfoot over the years. Is that something you'd be able to share, the second?
Well,
and if you don't feel comfortable, don't worry.
No, I'm good. So I didn't even really think that I had this thing until Eric and I were talking one day. And I remember, when was it? It was about the same time, a few years, maybe within a 3 or 4 year stretch. And I was going up to a place up the river farther, which is even more isolated. And I go up there often and hunt. So I drive in on this road and, you know, hunt on the way in to our place on the river, our family's place on the river. And there was this one spot, and when I come up there on that spot in my jet boat, it was like, I always remember it so well. I'm not going to say any names because, you know, everybody would know that knows me, or that, you know, is Yurok, would know exactly. So I don't want to do that. But it's a place where there's a family house down there, and there's a creek that runs down through it, and it's like a ravine, and it's a big opening, and it was logged. So it was the best hunting spot. I mean, it was just fabulous. I would go up there in the wintertime, right before winter, like the end of summer, not winter. That's not a good time to hunt, but just be a lot of activity. I might go up there at night and there'd be big old bucks running around, and we did very well for years, and then everything started growing up. But so one time I'm driving, it was the middle of the day, it was end of summer, I think school had started, I was working, it was on a weekend, so I went up there to see if I could knock something over, and I was driving down this dirt road looking over the side of the bank, and it went way down, and then it went all the way down to the river, but you couldn't see the river. You could see down this cut that had been clear cut, and it was kind of growing back. So there was clover and lots of grass, lots of feed, for deer. And then below that, it expanded, went another, maybe a half mile, and then it just went down to the river. And so anyway, I look back to my right, and right along the tree line, so there's this open area, this meadow that kind of rolled down the hill quite a ways, maybe 400 yards. And then on to the right was just like a straight cut tree line where they cut this area that was designated, but right next to it, like a straight line, was the tree line, and then it led down into this area where there's water, and then it leads out into the river. So it's a great, it's like a highway for deer and bear and everything. They go down this area, they got water, good coverage, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I look back, and I'm just cruising along looking for deer, and I see this thing kind of hopping around, and it's small. It's like 2.5, 3 feet tall. And I just, I saw it in the tall grass. So the grass is probably 2.5, 3 feet tall. And it was kind of jumping up and rolling around, just, whatever. And I thought, oh, a little bear. And then I was trying to register it, and I was like, wait a minute, that was weird. It did not seem like a bear, because bears have, more like torso and smaller legs, and just the way they just move differently, obviously than any other animal. And I kind of hit the brakes. I'm seeing it. I'm visualizing it right now, what I saw. It was like this cinnamon brown, long hair, it might have been 2 of them. And I just hit the brakes, and I was like, okay, what was that? And I sat there for a second. I was like, I got to check that out again, because that just did not seem right. So here we go again. I put it in reverse. I back up real quickly, and I get out of the truck, and I go stand up on the road. And I'm like looking around for something, and there was nothing there. So a part of me felt like they knew, whatever it was, maybe the mom or whatever, that something wasn't right. It really it sparked my interest again. And I didn't even think about the one previous. I was just in the moment, thinking that was weird. That did not look like a bear. And so I never even really thought about it. Kind of thought about it, but not so much to where I'm going to go out and tell everybody, oh, I saw Bigfoot. I'm not going there, And, but then I was talking with Eric a while back, and I said, well, I kind of, and I had that feeling of confusion, because I really could not put my finger on what I saw. The jumping and kind of rolling around like little kids. And, it did not seem like a baby bear. Not to say they don't do that, but their legs are short. And this thing it was different to the point where I knew it was different unconsciously, even more than I maybe knew. And that's what made me stop and dude, go back and look at that. What was that? And, unfortunately it was gone. But, you're talking about this intuition, or, maybe the sixth sense that they have. I mean, just like deer, I'm hunting, they know, they can tell when you got your rifle. I mean, they know most of the time. And, so yeah, I would think that they would kind of be stealthy in the same way that, if somebody's going to pull back and come look at them, they probably are pretty good at getting out of there. So that was my other thing. So if I did see something, it was small, it was a juvenile, maybe just a few years old. And as soon as I went back, it was 10 seconds, maybe not even 10 seconds, backed up pretty quick. It was gone. And I think there was 2 of them. But yeah, they were just romping around in the tall grass.
But it sounds like you had a completely different reaction than your first experience, where you were kind of frozen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that you point that out, totally different. because it wasn't big and I didn't, there was an ominous feeling. Where the first one, it was definitely like there was fear, like deep, deep stuff. Like, I don't know. I've been in fights before, and I don't get, it doesn't scare me. It's like, okay, we're gonna go. And if I would have seen something like this, in front of me, I would have been running. I mean, it's like there is no chance you're gonna stand in with something like this. And I've never felt that way before. Not that I couldn't get my rear kicked, but I'm just saying that was just such a different feeling, man. It'd be like facing off with a bear that's trying to eat you. It was just crazy.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine that. I've never had I've heard things. I've heard vocalizations in the Willamette National Forest in Oregon, but never had any visuals of any kind.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Did the sound that you heard, was it a deep kind of like, was it a whoop kind of sound, guttural, kind of like what I explained?
So I have heard a whoop before. It was in Iowa, and it sounded just like a gibbon from the zoo, which was really weird. What I heard in Oregon is very weird too, because I only remember half of it. My ears kind of clicked off, and just I almost felt like I bottomed out and I passed out. It was very weird. I don't remember a lot of the sound, but I remember enough that I heard a roar and a scream at the same time. And it was just like, there was this primal kick in where it was like, you're in trouble, buddy.
Yep. That's what I felt. Absolutely, man.
It was like, everyone was like, what in the world is going on? It's very, very strange. But yeah, it's how you mentioned there's a primal deal where it's like, yeah, I've never heard this before, but I know how to react to it.
Run.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there's stories that get thrown around the community, and there's one from up in Oregon, and I'm just curious if it reminds you of anything from your culture, because maybe we're not looking at it the right way, but there are people that say that they will be walking through the woods and they'll come upon or walk through portals. Sometimes small, shorter creatures will come out of the portals. Is that anything that could have connections to things you've heard in the past?
Maybe not me personally, but I told my story to a buddy of mine, or a guy that kind of worked around my house, older guy, and he said that this is kind of loosely connected. I think he was walking around out in the woods, and he and his son, and it was late at night, and he said they heard these big like boulders splashing in the water, and I've heard that. I'm sure you've heard that, where they throw rocks or something, and he said it wasn't just the boulders. He said the feeling they felt, like this vibe of like you're picking up that energy as an animal, it just scared them. Same kind of thing. But as far as like portals and orbs, that's stuff that's totally new to me that I've been hearing the last few years, where initially when I heard it, I was like, but now, I mean, I think anything's possible. You listen to guys like Bob Lazar, and my son kind of introduced me to some of these things, Joe Rogan, just kind of legit mainstream kind of guys that are throwing things around that I'm kind of pondering now that I never did before. Just like we never believed in UFOs when I was a kid growing up. It's like you're a crackpot. We had people that believed in that. No, that's not true. Now it's like, okay, they're true. So if you've got aliens, or UFOs, and likely have aliens and people fly spaceships, how hard is it to imagine Bigfoot? Which, I mean, we've got these Gigantopithecus. We found a jaw. It's pretty analogous to what Bigfoot would be. I mean, to a T. This giant thing, and then,
right.
I mean, it's an animal. We're not even talking about UFOs, and we know that, as far as evolution is concerned, we're finding missing links and different, different, whatever you call them, in between, that they just found somebody recently, and it's like, well, this one's a little different than we thought. So it changes everything, which is science. You want them to be able to do that. But I just think there's been so much kind of laughing, pointing the finger, mockery of this versus, how real can this be? And I think we're moving in that direction. I think it's a matter of time before somebody actually, unfortunately, is, going to kill one or something. And then, we'll have more like hard evidence. But I don't know. I mean, these portals and black holes or whatever, I mean, it could, why not? I mean, there's other stuff that's really unexplainable.
Absolutely. Just more weird stuff seems to be coming out, especially this year. So you never know. Maybe we'll get the Bigfoot stuff next. Or maybe we won't. And maybe that would be okay. Maybe we just need to give him some space, but I don't know. It all depends on how you look at it. But Rich, it has been just a privilege to talk to you and to learn some really interesting things from the Yurok side of looking at Bigfoot. And I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. It has been it's been a privilege to have you on.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, one Yurok. We've got lots of Yuroks that probably be have different ideas, but there's also plenty that agree with what I have to think, or not agree with, but have the same kind of thoughts or ideas. And thank you so much for having me on here and kind of moving this forward and giving it validity in terms of, the research that's being done. Like Eric is doing the same thing, Eric Nelson there at Bigfoot, and other people that are really taking this in a scientific way. And I just think it's a matter of time. We're getting more and more information, and it's really exciting. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Just wanted to take a minute to thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Rich's story is one that lingers, not just because of what he heard echoing across the river, but because of what it meant, a connection to ancestors, to land, and to something primal that we still don't understand. So huge thanks to Rich for sharing a piece of his Yurok heritage and for reminding us that sometimes the deepest truths are passed down in whispers and in roars. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube and tap the bell so you never miss a new episode, and share it with a friend who needs to hear a good Bigfoot story. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow and leave a review. It truly helps the show reach more listeners. And if you or someone you know has had an encounter with Bigfoot, especially in Northern California or anywhere along the Klamath River, please email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story. And also, don't forget Sasquatch Summerfest is coming July 11th through 12th in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And Bigfoot Society listeners get 2-day passes for the price of one with code BFS at checkout. So grab your tickets now at www.sasquatchsummerfest.com. Thanks again for being part of the Bigfoot Society. And until next time, keep your eyes open, respect the stories, and never stop listening to the land. And see you in the woods.